Biodiversity and ecosystem services is something we often overlook because we think, the nice animals and the bees. Well, it's not just nice animals, it's our environment we rely on for food, right? If there is no functioning ecosystem, there is no food, and then things are kind of not so nice.
Okay, welcome to the fourth episode in this podcast series. Last time we talked about all the facts of climate change with Professor Reto Knutti, somebody who's been a climate researcher at the ETH in Zurich for many, many years, I think 17 years so far. Today, we're going to carry on with that conversation, but Reto's going to tell us about the things that we can't know, the things that we don't know just now, the things that we know will go wrong if the world gets warmer than 2 degrees above pre-industrial temperatures. But the reasons why we don't know when things are going to go wrong. Is it going to go wrong at 3 degrees, 4 degrees, or 5 degrees? We're going to talk about how that's going to impact our life in the future. Will we be able to eat potatoes and chips and all those wonderful potato products in the future, or will potatoes not grow in the future? That's a conversation we're having today. Will you have trees in your garden or not? These are really interesting subjects because you don't hear that too much on a climate debate. You hear about all the hard facts and all the stuff that's going to be clickbait for podcasts like us. But this is really going a bit deeper, and I think it's really a very, very important part of the conversation we had with Professor Knutti. I do hope you enjoyed. So I'm going to have a little attack on climate science now. And you know, you're talking to somebody who's spend a lot of time encouraging people in companies to do things differently. Mm-hmm. And I think one thing that we got wrong, and I have to say I studied physics, so I'm part of the club in this sense, but one thing we got wrong was talking about 1.5 and 2 degrees. I think this is something that people like yourself who work in this environment totally understand, because you relate that to all the different impacts that it has. Mm-hmm. Personally, I think if we're looking back now with hindsight, and you can always be cleverer with hindsight, but we should have set a scale of 0 to 2000 and not even mention anything about degrees. I have the feeling if we talk about 2 degrees, everyone says, well, that's great. I grew up in Northern England, 2 degrees warmer, bring it on. That's fantastic. 2 degrees warmer in Scotland. Love it. That's beautiful. And the Spaniards, well, they can live with 2 degrees warmer as well. But it's not actually about everyone just being 2 degrees warmer. It's the impact of that, which is actually the thing we need to worry about, right?
That's true. I'm not sure it would be better if we had it on a scale of 1 to 2000 or something. The problem is connecting some kind of abstract number to the things that actually concern you in your daily life or your business, right? Yeah. And any scale has to have a translation. We're not very good at making these abstract connections based on numbers. We live by experience. We learn from mistakes, from errors, from looking sideways on what others are doing. Mm-hmm. So these abstract concepts are just not very useful, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, if you tell people the risk of being eaten by a shark is 1 in a million, they have no clue what that means. Yeah. But a shark seems like very dangerous, right? So they're scared of sharks more than they're scared of dogs, even though the dogs are much more likely to eat you or kill you than the sharks, right? Yeah. So one is sort of translating the abstract scale into tangible impacts, mm-hmm. and one is just making connections to something that we have never observed. Right? Mm-hmm. We're living in the past in a sense that we think about how things were, mm-hmm. and we can think about how a bad thunderstorm is, but we have a poor ability to imagine things that go way beyond the things we have observed in the past. Right?
And I think. So, you mentioned in the opinion piece that you wrote, the bulletin, I think it's called Lost in Data, and I think at the end you talked about we really have to fight against this myth that there was a golden age where everything was better and that we can get back there. I grew up in the 70s, I completely agree with you. It wasn't that good. It wasn't that good, but...
I mean, first of all, it wasn't that good, right? Yeah. Honestly, if you look at many of the indicators we have, and that's true for energy, for education, for health, for income, for access to whatever, things weren't that great. But somehow people tend to be anchored in the past. And I struggle with many people who tend to want to preserve what we had in the past. Mm-hmm. I mean, with all the traditions and mm-hmm. conservative ideas that I can understand the ideas, but if you want to try to preserve, then you should realize that you cannot preserve because it's already changing. That's one thing. And because many other aspects are changing anyway. As I said, we're not taking the horse anymore because the horse is just too expensive and too slow. So we're taking a bike or a car.
Yeah.
Technology is changing, right? No one would claim today that we should write things on paper and do the math by hand, right?
Yeah.
Because the computer is just more reliable and faster. Right?
Yeah.
So things are changing rapidly. Urbanization, people moving away from the rural parts and moving into the city. So we can either ignore these things and try to pretend that nothing is changing, or we can be part of that change and try to shape that change, because it's going to happen. And other societies, especially Asia, they are actively working on that change because they see the opportunities geopolitically, economically, they see it happening. So we can try to be part of that. And that's where I think most of the Western world should actually be, right? Because we have a lot of smart people, a lot of money, a lot of technology, and we will be in the best position to shape that change.
Absolutely. And how will the future be if we start making, serious choices now? Can we look forward to a brighter future? Is there going to be a better future out there if we start taking climate change seriously now and actually changing our habits, changing our technologies?
Absolutely. It's not going to be perfect because what we put out in the atmosphere is going to stay there for a very long time. CO2 has a very long residence time.
How long?
Well, thousands of years, basically.
Okay.
CO2 is stable, right?
And what about recapture? Everyone talks about recapture. Is that just something to...
Basically, CO2, the warming from CO2 is largely irreversible for centuries and millennia to come.
Okay.
Right? So we cannot easily go back, which is an important thing that's often overlooked, right? We think in the space of air pollution and water pollution and other things where, and even COVID, where if things go wrong, you say, oh my God, and we have to act quickly, and then we go back and then we're fine again. Right? We've reversed air pollution here. We can drink the water from the lake. Right?
The ozone layer has been...
Ozone is getting better. So we kind of expect that once we invest, things will get better. For climate change, it's actually not that easy, right? You can just basically stop it from getting worse. But you have a choice between somewhat worse and really bad and exceptionally bad. Right? That's the choices we have. So there's definitely a world that can be better by acting versus not acting, right? Or in other words, the most expensive thing to do and the dumbest thing to do is to do nothing and wait for things to go wrong and then fix it, right? So as in many other parts of the world, it's easier to prevent the change and do something proactively rather than waiting for things to go wrong.
Okay.
But we cannot solve everything. We can not avoid the 1.5 degree warming. We're already there almost. We're going to probably be at 1.6, 1.7 at least, maybe even a bit more. But we have a choice between 1.7 and 2 or 3 or 4 or whatever.
And it's like, what will that change actually mean to us? I know you can't explain the whole of the world and the whole of society, but if we manage to limit it to 1.7 compared to it goes to 2.7, what does that actually mean to me as a human being living in Central Europe?
Well, so we are already seeing the impacts, as we said, right? We're seeing 3 degrees almost in Switzerland. We're seeing the heat, especially in summer in the cities. People die from heat, right? There's several hundred people dying in this small country every summer from heat. The first heat wave in 2003 killed 70,000 people in Europe. Additionally, 70,000, it's a lot of people, right? And these things are going to get worse. We're seeing the trends in natural disasters, especially flooding. We're seeing droughts, right? 2022, 2015, 2018 were dry years, and even in places that were not so much affected by drought, it's going to get more pronounced, as we already see in the Mediterranean, in Spain, in California, right? So these things will happen. Glaciers are melting. We've already lost something like half of the Swiss glaciers.
I was in Flims recently. There's not a lot left, right?
It's amazing, right? In the last 10 years, we lost 25% of the Swiss glaciers. Something like it's a very large number, right? And as a consequence, sea level is rising, also mostly because of the expansion of warmer water and the large ice sheets that are melting. And if you increase sea level by half a meter or a meter, there's going to be hundreds of millions of people that will no longer be living in that space. So they have to move. So,
Okay.
So these are just a few things. And then, of course, as we go towards higher warmings, then our discussion about tipping points becomes relevant, because as you go to 2 degrees, 3 degrees, and so more, and more, then the likelihood of these things going rapidly wrong, of course, increases dramatically.
Okay, so it's not just that we see that the tendencies that we've seen over the last few years will continue. There's also the danger that we'll accidentally trip something that's like a domino effect that happens incredibly quickly.
Yeah.
And is it irreversible, right? If I've understood correctly.
And that's true not just for humans, but also, of course, for ecosystems. Right? I mean, humans can adapt in a sense that they build houses and they cool the houses, but the species cannot, right? The animals cannot. So they can migrate and they can adapt a little bit, but they can only adapt so much. And at some point they can just no longer adapt, or the environment is changing much faster than they can adapt or move, and they're gonna die, or ecosystems are no longer working.
And that basically means there's less food for us at the end of the food chain, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, biodiversity and ecosystem services is something we often overlook, because we think, the nice animals and the bees. Well, it's not just nice animals, it's our environment we rely on for food, right? If there is no functioning ecosystem, there is no food, and then things are kind of not so nice, right?
I know you mentioned about the drought in 2022, and I believe that was when in Canada there was an area, and you might want to correct me if you know better, but I believe the area was as large as France, Germany and Switzerland together. And that area of crop died within, I think, 3 or 4 days, because the temperature rose so high, I think 2 or 3 degrees above what it had ever been before in that region. And basically this whole area of the size of 3 countries in Canada where crop was being grown, it just died. There was no harvest for that area.
Yeah, I don't know the exact numbers anymore, because these things happen all the time in different parts of the world. But these are examples where plants have some sort of physiological thresholds. I used the potato examples in Switzerland. So if it gets half a degree warmer, then we have actually more potatoes, because it means a longer growing season and a bit more CO2 helps, right? So the potato farmers are happy. If it gets 3 or 4 degrees warmer in the summer, there are no potatoes left. Right. I mean, but at some point the potatoes are just killed, because it's too hot, or too dry, or both, right? So some of the changes in climate could be relatively gradual, but the impacts could be very nonlinear, right? So that could be true for species, could be true for plants, it could be true for forests, right? Certain types of trees, they tend to be okay within a certain limit, and once it gets too warm, they're just gone.
That's
right? They can no longer survive.
Yeah, and we've all seen that as well with a tree in our garden that's been there for many, many years and then just gets to a certain age and dies. We see how quickly a tree can go, right? Yeah. Let's talk a little bit now about the role of society. And one thing that I really liked in the Lost in Data bulletin paper that you wrote was, that thing about we need to work with each other. Okay, so today in episode 4 of this interview with Professor Knutti, we've talked about the things that are very hard to predict. If you tuned in and you saw episode 3, you'll have heard all the hard facts about climate change, the things that we do know, the things that just should not and cannot be denied. If we move into the next episode, then on episode 5, we're going to talk about the power of collaboration. We're going to talk about the requirement of regulation compared to whether you and I just need to do something or whether we need to be forced to do something. We'll talk about how misinformation is really having a negative impact on our future and what we can do to combat that. Once again, as with all these conversations with Professor Knutti, it's really fascinating. So please do subscribe on our YouTube channel to make sure that next episode's in your feed, or go across to patreon.com, search for the Earth Circle, and once you're registered up there, you'll be able to see all of these podcasts that are waiting for you today already.